Hello and welcome. You're watching Nothing But the Truth. As the unrest in Kashmir enters its 15th day without any sign of abating, my guest is the former Chief Minister of the state and now working President of the National Conference Party, Omar Abdullah. Mr. Abdullah, let's start with the present unrest that's paralyzed Kashmir for 15 days. To be honest, we've had similar unrest in 2008, 2010, and to be even more frank, periodically since 1990 when the troubles began. And that raises a fundamental question. Are we mishandling Kashmir? Are we in danger of treating it as a law and order problem rather than focusing on and responding to the alienation of the people?
Well, I think that's a problem. That's a mistake that we have made periodically. And I think the biggest complaint all of us in Jammu and Kashmir have is that we only seem to attract the attention of the powers that be when we go up in flames. When things are peaceful and life is relatively calm and normal, that's the time to actually sit down and try and address the problems. But at that time, we satisfy ourselves with a peaceful election, a good tourist season. We have various parameters to determine what is normal and what isn't. And therefore, the moment things appear to be calm on the surface, we lull ourselves into a sense of complacency. And then you end up with a summer like this.
Now, on Tuesday, Wajad Habibullah, one of the better-known divisional commissioners in Kashmir, said that successive central as well as successive state governments have failed miserably to make Kashmiris part of the mainstream. If he is right, let me ask you a personal question. How much of the blame and responsibility lies with your grandfather, Sheikh Abdullah, your father, Farooq Abdullah, and you yourself? Because together, the three of you have been chief ministers of Jammu and Kashmir for something like 31 years.
You know, if the agitations were about demands to do with the state administration, the state apparatus, then obviously not just the lion's share, the entire responsibility would lie with those who have occupied the office of Chief Minister of Jammu and Kashmir. But what the protesters in Jammu and Kashmir are demanding is not better amenities, it's not better governance, it's not more jobs. I mean, you tell me, you've got 8-year-olds and 10-year-olds today lying in hospital injured. You think they're agitating for jobs? You think they're agitating for better quality roads?
It's a political demand.
It's a political demand. It's a political problem. And their demands don't begin and end with the state government. They actually begin and end with the center. Now, the state can play the role of a facilitator. The state can try and focus the attention of the center on the problem, which at least I take some satisfaction from the fact that whether in office or out of office, I have continuously made the point that Jammu and Kashmir is a political problem. You can't buy a solution to it.
So the myopia has been from Delhi. The inability or the refusal to recognize the nature of the problem as alienation and as a political rather than a developmental problem, that's Delhi, that's today.
Even today, you are living in denial. Look, I take the point that Pakistan will fish in troubled waters. They always have done, they always will do. But if we are going to convince ourselves that this current 15-day-old agitation is a product of Pakistan's mischievous designs, then I'm sorry, we are making the same mistakes again and again. Pakistan is taking advantage of the situation, but even Pakistan was caught by surprise when this thing suddenly flared up. So to stand up in Parliament and say that Pakistan is responsible for what is happening, again, absolves us of the responsibility of trying to find a solution internally, which is what we should be doing.
I want very much to focus in depth on the situation today and the nature of response needed today, but for the sake of those who don't understand the history, and history is all important in Kashmir, let me go back a little first. Writing recently in the Indian Express, the Kashmiri IAS officer Shah Faisal said, all these years, India has been communicating to Kashmiris through rigged elections, dismissal of elected governments through encounters and corruption. How much damage has been done to the way Kashmiris perceive their relationship with India by the fact that your grandfather was dismissed and arrested in 53, your father was toppled in 1984 at midnight, and then there was the 87 rigged election just 3 years before the actual troubles began. How much damage has that done?
Well, of course, I mean, each of these incidents has caused its own long-term fallout. But to suggest that it's all been doom and gloom and negative, and there's been nothing positive that has happened in all these years is also wrong. I mean, the last few assembly elections, I struggle to find a single person who can point the finger of blame and suggest that these were rigged elections. The turnout in some places was healthy, in some places was unhealthy. But I didn't see a single voter who stood up and said, look, I didn't want to vote, I was forced to
You're
come out.
absolutely right in saying that recent elections have been clean. May have had low turnouts, but they haven't been rigged. But has the memory of the past been wiped out, or does that memory still rankle?
Memories don't get wiped out, but people are willing to set that aside, provided we are seen to be learning from our mistakes,
and that's
which
where we're
tragically
failing.
is what we are not doing.
Now, in fact, something else that people remember is that in the last 20 years, Kashmir has had something like 700,000 troops stationed in the state, which seen through Kashmiri eyes makes the place look like occupied territory. With hindsight, perhaps, but was it a mistake to maintain such a huge presence for so many decades?
But I think we first need to look at the troop levels that were maintained prior to 1988-89, because to suggest that all these 700,000 troops arrived post-89 when militancy broke out would also be wrong. Please remember, Jammu and Kashmir is one territory in India that has been fought over, and you've had wars fought within that territory ever since 1947. You've had wars with Pakistan and wars with China focused in Jammu and Kashmir, and therefore you have always maintained a troop presence. Yes, that troop presence was augmented because of the breakout of militancy, and we have been making the point repeatedly that areas that have calmed down, areas that see far less militancy than they did in the past, can actually do with a degree of troop reduction, and some of the more draconian laws and rules can be done away with in those parts.
Now, Mr. Chidambaram says that one of the unfortunate but unintended consequences of this level of military presence is that increasingly control of internal security has slipped out of the hands of the Chief Minister and into the hands of the GOC instead. And this has not only diminished the authority of civilian rule, but worse still, it looks wrong to Kashmiris.
Well, it does look wrong. Forget the authority of the Chief Minister. I'm sorry to say, even the authority of the Union Home Minister. There was no stronger votary for the removal of Armed Forces Special Powers Act in sections of Jammu and Kashmir in the centre than Mr. Chidambaram. But even he, as Union Home Minister, his proposal was vetoed in the Cabinet Committee on Security. So to suggest that the Chief Minister has been left with less power because of the military presence may be true, but unfortunately so has the Union Home Minister.
In fact, let's talk a little about this whole issue of the desire that Mr. Chidambaram had, that you had at the time when you were Chief Minister, to either dilute AFSPA or lift it from certain parts of the state. Mr. Chidambaram says he had the support of the BSF and the CRPF, but the army put its foot down. On the other hand, Lieutenant General Saeed Atta Hasnain, who was GOC in C-15th Corps at precisely the same time, says that the army only gave advice, it didn't veto. The fact is that the Defence Minister and the Prime Minister did not support Mr. Chidambaram, and that's why Mr. Chidambaram failed to get AFSPA lifted.
Look, I know the Defence Minister didn't support. From what I understand, and my knowledge or information on this is second-hand because I haven't discussed it directly with the PM. The PM hadn't formed an opinion one way or the other, but the PM was unwilling to veto the very strong reservations that were put up by the then Defence Minister, and for the duration that Mr. Pranab Mukherjee, who then went on to become the President but was at that time in the Union Council of Ministers, having served in the Defence Ministry as well, also had reservations on exactly those lines.
Did these gentlemen actually lack conviction? Did they lack courage? Because often decisions
I think it was
like
the courage. Because decisions like this take courage. I mean, take for example the relatively easier and smaller decision of dismantling bunkers in Srinagar city. Now, because Mr. Chidambaram and I were on the same page, we didn't need anybody's approval to do it. We went and dismantled more than 35 to 40 bunkers in the heart of Srinagar, bunkers that nobody in their wildest dreams thought would be removed. But we removed them with very little, in fact, any sort of adverse fallout whatsoever. We were told that Srinagar will become a beehive of militant activity again. It didn't happen. And I believe similar is the case with the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. We would have perhaps faced the occasional problem, but not to the extent that the army had projected.
In fact, what you're saying is that the army will always be against the lifting of AFSPA because it sees it as being in the army's interest to maintain it. The political courage would have to come from politicians, from the army's civilian bosses, and that was missing.
I don't know how the army, constantly being seen as the villain in this entire sordid sort of saga of the last 25 years benefits the army. I mean, when the army, if you go by their public pronouncements, they constantly tell you that, look, they don't want to be here, they're here by force, and the day they get a chance, they will leave. If that be the case, then when we create conditions that are conducive for them to start taking the back foot, and the back seat, so to speak, then by all means take advantage of those. Look, because the risk was all ours. We were the ones taking the decision. We would have carried the responsibility for it.
So in fact, the army position is contradictory, and worse still, the politicians who should have overruled the army lacked the courage to do so at a critical moment.
Unfortunately, yes. I think by then the UPA government was fighting on so many different fronts that perhaps the Prime Minister didn't feel he had the necessary political capital to open this front as well.
Let's now come to the present day, because writing in the Indian Express, the scholar Pratap Bhanu Mehta has this comment to make about how he views the situation in Kashmir. He says, let no one underestimate what has been on display in Kashmir since the killing of Burhan Wani. In one fell swoop, the legitimacy of the Indian state has been eroded. The comforting illusion that all we face is a cross-border intervention, not the deep and continual alienation of our own citizens, has been shattered. Would you agree with that?
He's not wrong at all. Right now, if you were to travel to Srinagar and meet some of the people lying in hospital injured, they are, I mean, the only thing they can tell people is that, look, I can't wait to get out of hospital. If I can find a weapon, I'm going to become a militant.
So is the situation today worse than 2008 and 2010?
Definitely.
Has it turned a
Look, please understand, 2008, there was a legitimate reason for that anger. As much as people may or may not agree with it,
Yatra.
You had the Amarnath Yatra, and not more than the Amarnath Yatra, it was the economic blockade of Kashmir by traders in Jammu and elsewhere, which forced them to start looking towards Muzaffarabad when security forces responded with excessive force, and the problem spiraled out from there. 2010 was about the Matsil fake encounter and the demand for justice, which led to a Quit Kashmir movement. Then you had the errant tear smoke shell that killed Tufail Mattu, and everything went downhill from there. 2016 is about no such demands. There is no demand for justice. There is no demand for economic linkages with Muzaffarabad. It's not about land. It is pure and simple anger, resentment, and everything else coupled together, which is where you see now. And that's the worrying part for me. 8-year-old, 10-year-old kids are on the streets getting injured without any fear of reprisals, repercussions, or even the use of force by the security forces.
So this time around it is explicitly anti-India.
Sure, yeah. That's the only way to understand it and explain it.
Let's then come to what we do in the present circumstances. In an interview that he gave me on Wednesday, Mr. Chidambaram said that the core of the problem in his eyes is that, and I'm quoting him, we have ignored the grand bargain under which Kashmir acceded to India. We broke faith, we broke promises, and what he's really saying is that India went back on the terms of accession, slowly, steadily, and without consulting the Kashmiris, it expanded them, thus undermining the autonomy that Kashmir thought it would retain. Do you agree with him?
Absolutely. For want of a better set of words, India has actually been dishonest with the people of Jammu and Kashmir. Because you struck a deal, you struck a bargain. Jammu and Kashmir acceded to India on the basis of certain conditions, which is that the Union of India would be responsible for currency, communication, defense, and foreign affairs. Everything else would be the domain of the state. On the basis of those conditions, Jammu and Kashmir would remain a part of India. Jammu and Kashmir to this date remains a part of India. How much of those conditions have you actually fulfilled? You have gradually whittled that away to the point where that autonomy is but a fig leaf of what it was in 1947. So he's not wrong when he says that the state has been treated badly.
And this whittling away began the day your grandfather was thrown out of office.
It began in 53 when he was arrested.
Do you think that was one reason why he was arrested and thrown out, so that the state could actually go back on a deal?
I don't know. There are many different theories, and I've had this conversation with my dad very many times, and I guess that's a subject for a much longer conversation with you. It has a lot to do with the people around Pandit Nehru at that time and the suspicions that they sort of created in his mind about my grandfather and a whole host of other things.
But the problem that began and has reached a fever pitch today started at that moment in 53.
Yeah, the problem now is that even people who until recently perhaps might have been willing to even talk on autonomy and restoration of the position that Jammu and Kashmir enjoyed between 47 and 53, today that segment of population is even smaller. I mean, again, I mean, it's a.
I mean, the people or the percentage that want to remain India on
No,
new terms has shrunk.
the number of people whose aspirations you can address by something like that has got smaller. I mean, again, I make that point. Look, these 8-year-old, 10-year-olds on the streets agitating today. I doubt very much whether they're going to take any satisfaction from any sort of conversation on the lines that we're talking about right now.
Mr. Chidambaram's great solution was to say that after analyzing the problem as the break of faith, the break of promises, he says we now need to give an assurance to the Kashmiris that that grand bargain which brought them to India when the accession was signed will be fulfilled and honored to the extent possible. In other words, what he's saying, to the extent you can today, roll back to the status quo that existed in 47 when Kashmir acceded.
How can you find fault with logic like that? And that's precisely what the National Conference has been saying right from 96 onwards. That look, we are asking for the sky, but we are realistic enough to understand that enough water has flown under the Jhelum since 53, and therefore there has to be some meeting ground which addresses the demands of the people of Jammu and Kashmir with also the current realities as they exist today. But to suggest that no dialogue will take place at all, I mean, to live in denial about the political nature of this problem, to believe that if you spend a package of 80,000 crores, all this anti-India sentiment will miraculously and mysteriously disappear overnight, it's not going to happen.
How has Mr. Chidambaram's proposal gone down with Kashmiri public opinion, or with curfew in place? Is it impossible to tell?
Well, no. I mean, there is a section of the population that has seen his interview, that has taken it very well, but they were not surprised by the immediate pushback that came from Mr. Chidambaram's party when the Congress issued a statement saying that these are his personal views and not the party views. So again, it's disappointing that in a situation like this, when we really need to start thinking out of the box, even then, when somebody is willing to sit up and take the first knock, you immediately turn on and say, well, hang on, this guy talks only for himself and for nobody else.
One, as you say, his party didn't support him, they've distanced themselves from it. Secondly, the government itself, in the shape and form of Mr. Venkaiah Naidu, has called it cheap politics. Yesterday, Prakash Jagdeo said it was atrocious what Mr. Chidambaram had said. But there's another problem. Kashmiris have heard this sort of solution or proposal made many times. If you recall, in the mid-90s, just before your father returned as Chief Minister, Narasimha Rao said, the sky is the limit. Mr. Vajpayee, when he was Prime Minister, said a solution could be found within the boundaries of insaniyat, which was very similar. These sort of suggestions have happened before, but never lived up to.
Rajiv Gandhi went, when he came as leader of the opposition to Jammu and Kashmir in the early 90s, went so far as to tell people कि आप बस हमारे साथ रिश्ता एक रख लीजिए, बाकी आप सारा कुछ ले लीजिए, बस सिर्फ एक हमारे साथ वो जो रिश्ता बना हुआ है उसको मत तोड़िए, the rest you take whatever you need. So, look, again I make the point that these promises were made at a time when things were in flux, there was turmoil. Things settled down, everything was forgotten. The same has happened again and again and again, and today we are where we are. And the problem with this is that there will be far less takers today for what we are talking about than there would have been even in 2010. I'm telling you, in 2010 you sent an all-party delegation, people were willing to meet them. In 2010 you appointed interlocutors, they were well received across the length and the breadth of the state.
But not this time now, if that happens again.
I'm telling you that this time if you send a team of interlocutors, I will be reluctant to waste my time to talk to them. Because when nothing came out of the first process,
why bother again?
We supported them. We gave them every sort of opportunity to do their work. When they completed their report and handed it over to the centre, it should have been placed in Parliament. At least we would have taken some satisfaction that the document has been sanctified by being placed on the table of the House.
What do you make of Mr. Chidambaram's explanation about not acting on that report? In that interview that he gave me on Wednesday, he had three reasons. One, he says that his successor, Mr. Shinde, didn't see it as an issue of the same priority. Secondly, he says that in fact the army was reluctant to accept any of the proposals that would affect the army. And thirdly, he says the cabinet itself was sharply divided.
So what? Put it in Parliament, talk about it. I mean, how many things is the cabinet united on? You talk to people. I've had cabinet meetings in which my cabinet has been sharply divided. You chip away at the divisions. Nobody expected an overnight acceptance of every point in that report. I'm sure there were a lot of aspects in that report that were made for very uncomfortable reading. But again, I mean, if the former Union Home Minister is going to tell me that even the government of India is afraid of what the army thinks, then I'm sorry. I mean, is this an elected democratic government? I haven't seen anywhere in the constitution that tells me that the army will have a veto over anything. Yes, the army has concerns and we have to take those concerns on board. But once those concerns are addressed, they don't get a veto over anything.
And at the end of the day, the decision lies in the hands of civilian politicians. This is a democracy.
Look, if we are an elected government, then the elected government must have the courage of its convictions, take a decision and see it through to its consequences.
But there's a very interesting conclusion we're coming to, whether it's Narasimha Rao promising the sky is the limit, whether it's Mr. Vajpayee saying insaniyat ke daire mein, or whether it's Mr. Chidambaram on Wednesday, or whether it's even the interlocutors. The message to the Kashmiris are, these are just words, these are just things we say, we don't take them seriously once we've said them.
No, the message to the Kashmiris are that we will sit up and take notice of you when things are burning.
And forget
when things are
afterwards.
quiet, we will forget all about you. We will take satisfaction from tourist numbers, from election turnouts, from all sorts of other seemingly normal things. But we will not bother about the crux of the matter, which is the political problem of Jammu and Kashmir.
And why is it that they don't bother? Is it because they don't have the understanding to do so? Or is it that they think it's so politically complicated and perhaps even costly, they don't want to take the risk? What is it that stops them? Because
I think
they
it's a
can't be
combination.
unaware.
I think it's a combination of both. I think they're kind of hoping that since Punjab went away without any major concessions, Jammu and Kashmir will do the same. That we'll keep throwing money at the problem and the problem will disappear. But Jammu and Kashmir is not Punjab. Jammu and Kashmir is a completely different kettle of fish, and you can't wish this problem away. Karan, in 1990, if you had told me that 2016 you and I will still be discussing this problem, I would probably have killed myself out of depression with the thought of having to live with this for 26 years. But we've lived with it for 26 years. Are you telling me we're going to have to live with it for another 3-4 decades? I mean, what am I going to tell these youngsters that are agitating on the street? That the moment you stop agitating, we're going to forget about this problem? We need to wake up to the reality of Jammu and Kashmir. And the problem is, I don't see any sign of that even today.
In which case, and we're running out of time, what is it that you would like the government to do? You're meeting the Home Minister tomorrow because they're only very briefly in Delhi. Undoubtedly, as a former Chief Minister, he's going to say to you, what is it that I should be doing? What would your advice be?
Honestly, just accept the nature of the problem. I was disappointed when the Prime Minister came to Srinagar and then in his public meeting said he doesn't need advice. He knows everything about Jammu and Kashmir. If that be the case, then who's responsible for this current mess? If you know everything about Jammu and Kashmir and you don't need anybody's advice, then by extension of that logic, this problem ends at your doorstep.
So just acceptance of the nature is enough.
Today, honestly, if you are just willing to accept that the problem in Jammu and Kashmir is a political one that requires political handling, and you cannot buy yourself or shoot yourself a solution to this problem, I will take some satisfaction from that and then work from there. But if you're unwilling to accept even the very basis of this problem, then I'm sorry, we're just kidding ourselves.
Let me put you a proposal that I've raised in my discussion programs all of last week. Would it help if our Prime Minister, who has enormous belief in himself, who can be extremely persuasive and who has the capacity to take risks, because after all he went on Christmas Day to meet Mr. Nawaz Sharif, if the same Prime Minister to go on television and in an emotional way address the people of Kashmir and accept mistakes have been made, let's both accept them, but now's a moment to reach out with each other, to forge a new relationship as brothers and equals. If you were to do that and make a personal appeal and take a personal initiative, could it work? Could it cut through?
In the short term it will, but it won't carry as much weight as it would have done in the past, because let's not forget, again, Atal Bihari Vajpayee Sahab, from the ramparts of the Red Fort on 15th August in 2002, said that mistakes have been made in Kashmir and we will not repeat those mistakes again. From then to now, how many times have we repeated those mistakes again and again?
Because these are things that the Kashmiris have heard, believed in, and now lost faith in.
I haven't forgotten them. And I'm part of the mainstream. If I haven't forgotten them, you think those who have far more serious issues with the whole concept of Jammu and Kashmir's relationship with India, you think they've forgotten them?
So even this grand initiative, if the Prime Minister were to take it, and I have no reason for believing he will, but if you were to, even that is not a guarantee that things will sort out, because the follow-up has to happen.
It will help. It will definitely calm tempers, but there will be far more suspicion today than there would have been a few years ago, because if it's not followed through, then every time a problem like this arises, it just becomes that much more difficult to find an early end to it.
My last question, we're clearly staring into the abyss. How close are we to toppling over?
I'm not sure what do you mean by toppling over? I mean, do you mean that this problem will continue for the foreseeable future? Quite possible. Everyone is counting on the fact that this agitation will run its own course, people will get tired. But from talking to colleagues, friends, people in the media who've actually traveled around the valley, they say there are no signs of this. The levels of anger that they see amongst youngsters today is absolutely unprecedented. I mean, you have fathers who are actually upset that their sons are only coming back injured and not coming back dead. I mean, that's the thought process in some minds today. As I told you, you have people injured in hospital who are saying, look, just let me get out of here, get my hands on a gun, and I'm going to become a militant. This level of anger doesn't disappear overnight.
Omar Abdullah, what you said are words that need to be taken very seriously in Delhi and heard and responded to with great sincerity. Thank you very much for speaking to me.